Good afternoon. This is Greg Schmidt from the Prosperity for America channel with this month's update on the current employment market in the United States for March of 2024. Now that we're into April, we can look back at the numbers as to what actually happened employment-wise in our country, and actually things went pretty well. We continue to create new jobs at a pace that is very solid. Last month, 303,000 new jobs were created, bringing the total employed in the United States to 161.47 million people that are employed in the United States. That's a really good, solid number. The amount of people, population-wise, that are working is rightfully around 63%. That's been holding steady, give or take, over the last 4 or 5 years. But of course, we would like to see a little bit more improvement there. Now, looking at what's going on, as far as potential recession, just the numbers don't indicate that yet. The average weekly newly unemployed people per week averaged 214,000 for the month of March. Typically, with our population size, that number would need to be over 325,000 per week to be a recession. We still created more jobs than actually were cut. There was an increase in the amount of job cuts corporately in the United States to 90,000 job cuts during the course of the month, but the 300,000 job gain, 303,000 job gain for the month obviously more than outweighed that. So right now, as you look at whether or not it's a good time for you to change positions, there's still a lot of good news out there. But we still want to give you more data, because part of what we're trying to do with this monthly report is to give you all the data in 7, 8, 10 minutes, as opposed to how we get it in the news media. We get it, that might be the headline of the day. So we find out the unemployment rate is 3.8%, and then a week later we might hear that the weekly unemployment claims were 220,000 for that week. It's a little bit disjointed. So when it looks like you would need to make a decision about your employment situation, what we're trying to do here is make sure you have all the data in one place. That way you can look at things. As far as the average wage for the month of March, it went up by 0.3%, and over the last 12 months it's gone up by 4.1%. Now that's a good sign in and of itself. In other words, over the last year or 18 months, there have been some months where the average rate of pay went up between 5 and 6%. But that was because inflation was trending for that time frame between 7 and 8%, so people were still losing ground. So when we look at inflation as to how that might impact the unemployment or employment market here in the United States, if wages are going up at 4.1% a year, then we can pretty well expect inflation to be somewhere between 4 and 6% a year. So we're still looking at that kind of number inflation-wise, but at least it's moderated. It's a little more sustainable at this point. So basically, looking at the big picture, there are still 8.48 million jobs being paid advertised in the United States. And there's currently 6.5 million people in the United States out of work. So from this perspective, there's still 1.3 jobs per person available if every person were to take a job. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody would have the right job for them that they would always want. It just simply means there's more jobs out there than people unemployed. So theoretically, we could have zero unemployment if we were to have everyone take whatever job was available. Now, that's not necessarily the goal. I'm just simply talking about the math of the situation. So one thing that is kind of another piece of good news is during the heart of COVID, the amount of changes in jobs really drastically increased for obvious reasons in our country. So the average tenure of employment during the peak of COVID had gotten down to 2.8% years for every person that changed jobs. Now, going back 40 years to when I first got involved with HR work, the average American back in the 80s, actually late 70s, early 80s, changed jobs every 10 years and 8 months, which is really solid, very, very consistent. Nowadays, what we're looking at here in March of 2024 is the average American is changing jobs every 4 years and 1 month. So It's improving, going more towards stability. But an interesting aspect of things is there's still a higher amount of people open to looking for work than typical. And what I mean by that is typically 10% of the population in the United States is open to changing position at any given time. That number reached a peak during COVID of 21.4% in 2020-2021. But right now we're somewhere between 15 and 18% of Americans are open to looking at a new position, and 12.4 million actually are. So what that means is if 12.4 million people actually are looking for work, and there's 8.5 million jobs, just to give you an idea that the market is still pretty darn tight. That's if every one of those 12.4 million people just sent one resume to a company, that means the average company would only have 1.5 resumes for each job opening. Now, of course, people do send out more than one resume, but if you were to multiply that by 10, maybe 20, they might send their resumes. You say a person that's really serious looking for a job, they might send their resume to. Yeah, I think 20 is a little high, but let's just use 20 people. That means that the average company might get about 20 applicants or 20 resumes sent to them for their opening, which has been much more on the lighter side than it has been historically. So it obviously means it's a good time still for you to look for a better position. And there are still plenty of companies that are still growing. At this point, the gross national product in our country is still growing by more than 3% last quarter. That's actually a solid number. Any higher than that, it would probably be more inflationary. And if you're ever wondering why inflation is something that people worry about so much economically, it's just math. If inflation is over 5% consistently, that means in 4 or 5 years, just use 5 years. 5 years from now, if inflation is 5%, the average thing you go to buy is worth 25% more. And if you just look at basic economics, do you expect to sell more cars when the car is $30,000 or $40,000? Now, if the car is $40,000, you're probably going to sell less. And when people stop to buy things because of the cost that is triggered by inflation, that's usually the point where we're also triggering a recession. So historically speaking, from an economic standpoint, whenever inflation goes over 5% for more than 18 or 24 months at a time, it usually triggers a recession within the next year, 18 months as well. So it takes 3 or 4 years at that point. But like, for example, where we were at was inflation was going at an 8 to 10% rate for a little bit there. And that would have maybe triggered a recession in only 2 or 3 years. Now, from that point in time, we're about 2 or 3 years out from that. But nonetheless, a lot of these economic numbers are moderating. But in this market update, we're not worried about telling anyone what to do about the economy. We're talking about what actually is happening. So what actually is happening is this is still a really good time for you to look for a new position. And it's a good time to see if you can make a little bit more money. So if you need any help with making a resume or updating your resume, on the Prosperity for America channel, we have resume videos on how to get a better response to your resume. We have videos on how to get a better response for how you interview with companies. So we have videos on how to interview more effectively as an engineer, as a buyer. We're trying to work towards almost any type of position, quite frankly, to help as many people as possible. So we'd love to have you tune in next month, and we'd love to remind you to subscribe to the Prosperity for America channel. And so we'll be back next month in May to talk about what happened in April. So thanks for tuning in. We hope to see you next month. Have a great day. Looking for a technical professional or operations management position? Visit prosperity.jobs. For tips on how to get a better response to your resume online or how to interview more effectively to have a more prosperous career, visit the Prosperity for America channel on YouTube. Prosperity, it's what we all want.